Hi, my name is Ruth Rootberg, and I am an Alexander Technique teacher living in Amherst, Massachusetts, in the United States. I'm so grateful to the Developing Self team for giving me this opportunity to talk to anyone interested in the history of the Alexander Technique, in education especially. I'm going to talk to you about the Alexander Foundation School, which was a unique experiment in education that used the Alexander Technique as the underlying principle for all other activities at the school, academic and day-to-day living. From about 1947 to probably the late 1960s, the Alexander Foundation School operated in Media, Pennsylvania, a small community near Philadelphia. It was primarily a boarding school and also had some day students. This school was not the first school to rely on the Alexander Technique as the basis for an entire curriculum, but it was the first in the United States. Earlier, in London, England, a woman named Irene Tasker, who had learned the technique directly from F.M. Alexander through an apprentice-style teacher training, began to work with children in 1924, and thus was born what we now call the Little School. 10 years later, in 1934, the school was moved to Penhill in Kent, where it became a boarding school. By 1939, World War II had begun in Europe, and to protect the children, they were evacuated to Devizes, Wiltshire. That was far away from London and Kent. But then, the following year, in 1940, the children, with F.M. Alexander and two of his teachers, Margaret Goldie and Irene Stewart, boarded a ship and sailed to Canada to get even farther away from the fighting. From Canada, they traveled into the United States and settled in Stowe, Massachusetts, which is east of Amherst and west of Boston, and that is where the little school continued for about a year. I can't tell you what happened after the school closed. I don't know what happened to the English children, but I do know that F.M. Alexander returned to England. However, had it not been for their presence in Massachusetts, I wonder whether the Alexander Foundation School would have ever come into existence. This is what happened. There was a woman, Esther Duke of Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. She received her first Alexander lesson with F.M.'s brother, A.R. Alexander. Esther Duke was affiliated with a Quaker school called the Media Friends School. As she took lessons, she made the connection between what she was learning and what might be possible for children. And she said that the Alexander Technique could help children with getting the abundant life. So Margaret Goldie began teaching at the school, the Media Friends School. But she and Irene Stewart returned to England, as did F.M. Alexander, in 1943. Then Esther Duke persuaded A.R. Alexander to move his teacher training course that was started by F.M. in Stowe, continued by A.R. in Boston, to Philadelphia. It was with the influx of budding teachers from this training course that it became possible to consider offering the Alexander Technique to children on an ongoing basis, and eventually to start a school and a foundation. There was a short interval where children were given the Alexander Technique at the Media Friends School. Eventually, the Alexander cohort wished to have their own school. Property was purchased, and the school probably opened its doors September of 1947. They offered classes for kindergarten through 8th grade. As best I understand, the school continued until the late 1960s. It was run by two brothers and their wives, Donald, Thomas, Margaret, and Gracie Riggs. Margaret Riggs was trained in the Alexander Technique. She was the only one of the four who was trained. She and Dolly Daly, also known as Philomene Barr, provided the hands-on lessons to the children. I have had the privilege of speaking with 6 people who attended the Alexander Foundation School and have found that their memories match the tone and intent of the prospectus. I will share with you some recollections that have been published from 3 of them. First, Bill Fuhrman. He attended the school from its inception until 3 years later. His mother was the school's cook. Bill's fond memories lie in the relation he made with Tom Riggs, who became a surrogate father and taught him what became his life's work, woodworking. Bill remembers tasty food and nutritious snacks, small classes, and several naps a day. Bill called them naps. I imagine he was describing the semi-supine lie-down time. Class size was small. There was a freedom and excitement he did not find in other school systems. The teachers, he said, placed importance on experience. So there were field trips, and there were visitors. They did arts and crafts, and they had music. Bonnie Thatcher attended the school almost a decade later, from 1956 to 1959. When Bonnie attended, there were perhaps 14 students when she started, boarders and day students, and she remembers there was a slightly smaller group by her 3rd year. She remembers everything was neat. There was 0 clutter. The children lived the Alexander technique 24/7. It infused everything they did. They received hands-on work during private lessons, either from teacher Margaret, but they also had occasional trips to have lessons with Mrs. Barr. She was considered a senior teacher. There were constant verbal reminders throughout all kinds of activities. How you sat, how you stood, it was all very integrated. The Alexander orders were to be given in times of stress and at the beginning of class and before meals. The curriculum. Bonnie describes the curriculum as classical, with a grounding in Greek and Roman culture, as well as Shakespeare. She found the science program, chemistry and biology, to be excellent. The children were taught to handle books gently and carefully. They also learned to sew or type, and when they were learning that, they were also given Alexander directions. There was a lot of art, just as Bill had said, both talking about great works of art, field trips, and making it. Remember, it was a boarding school for most of them. Those children were assigned chores, and they were paid for doing them. I don't know how they spent their money. Agnes Grillo had her 5th grade schooling at the Alexander Foundation School, a few years after Bonnie left in 1962. Agnes remembers the school as a place where she received validation. Agnes and Bonnie both report they usually sat on the floor during class time. They did have desks. The desks were cut down to size. They were learning to have their bodies support them, not a chair. Bill and Bonnie both reported that with the classes being of mixed age, the older people helped the younger. Agnes said the teachers geared everything toward each individual child. But the academic and arts curriculum wasn't the only thing. Diet was an important component to the life at the Alexander Foundation School. A lot of food was grown in the garden. Flour was ground on the premises, and butter was churned. Most meals were vegetarian. Agnes arrived with chronic stomach pains, which cleared up after about a month of being there. She remembers the vegetarian diet as well as Teacher Margaret's advice. Teacher Margaret would tell her, "You should be sitting up straight. It will help your digestion." Bonnie remembers the school's philosophy like this: the teaching took in every aspect of living: how you slept, what you ate, what you wore, how you used your body, and how you treated people and things. Bonnie understood from the teachers that they wanted to know if it would make a difference in adulthood if people learned the Alexander technique during their childhood. I have been interested in that same question. Nobody set up a long-range study for this purpose, but both Bonnie and Agnes report having good backs in adulthood. As I learned more about this school, I realized the teachers aim to educate the whole child, giving practical application to Alexander's principle of the unity of the self. Bonnie and Agnes both visited the school and stayed in touch with the teachers long after they left and joined other school systems. Their visits continued until 1966 and 1967, respectively. I have not found any information indicating when or why the school finally closed its doors. I have searched, but I haven't found anything. You can find more details of this fascinating history by reading my article and the accounts of Bill Fuhrman, Bonnie Thatcher, and Agnes Grillo. My article can be found in a few places. It is on my website, www.ruthrootberg.com. You can also find it where it was first published, in M.AmSAT Journal number 1, spring of 2012. That issue also has recollections by Bonnie Thatcher and Bill Fuhrman. Issue number 3, spring of 2013, has Agnes Grillo's account. More recently, STAT published my article in the Alexander Journal, number 26, spring of 2017. I hope this story has given you some more insights into the history of the Alexander technique, especially as it has been taught to children. And perhaps it will be an inspiration for another school to develop that teaches the Alexander technique 24/7. Thank you for watching.